Most automation scripts fail for a simple reason. They can't find what they're looking for, whether it's a moving button, a hidden element, or any DOM change. Poor locators cause 80% of the flaky tests. But not today. In this video, we will master a few important topics like locators, assertions, and even page objects. These are the tools that you use to make your test smarter, reliable, and also maintainable. Hey, this is Tapas. Welcome back to our NightwatchJS series, the playlist. In this session, I'm going to explain you everything in detail. So in case you find the pace a bit slow, don't worry, just bump it up speed and enjoy the ride. Let's get started. First, let's get started with locators. What are locators? Locators are how Nightwatch finds element in your web app. Think of them like, the GPS coordinates for your elements. Without the precise locators, even the best written test also of no use, right? I have a form over here, and this is the email address field, and this is the password field. Now, if your script need to locate this email address field, how can it locate it? There are multiple ways that we can go about it, but first let's understand what is this particular field about and how it is built. I am doing a right click on this one and clicking on inspect. This will bring up the developer tools where I can inspect this particular element, and as I do, I am finding out that this is an input type text. The name is email, and there is something called an ID. You see over here, and the ID says input-email. Now there are multiple ways to tell Nightwatch to find this guy. One of the ways, and it could be the most common way, is to locate an element is by using its ID. So let us now look into some of the common locator strategies. The first strategy that we'll talk about is called by ID. The fastest and the most stable option, always use IDs if the IDs are available. For example, the email field we have seen just now, it had an ID called input-email. Now, as it is an ID on HTML, it can be accessed using the pound symbol just before the ID. So here we are accessing it using the pound symbol and then input-email. This will locate that element which is having an ID called input-email. And on top of that, we are setting a value saying user@email.com. So the first part to helps to locate it. Next part is to set the value. So if an element is having an ID, always go for it as the first option. The second strategy is by name. You can provide a name to each of the HTML element, especially with the input element. You must have the name attribute because there are a lot of dynamic behavior you can bring in your programming if you are dealing with those input elements. For example, the email input we have seen, we had given a name called email for that input element to say this is an input element which tackles with email addresses. Now you can locate that input element by its name. So in this case, we are doing input and then the subscript name equals to email. This is how that particular input element will be located. And on top of that, we are doing set value to set a value to it, just like how we did before. So we now know by ID and by name. The next one is by class. The class using which we can apply the number of CSS styles on an element. For example, if you have a button and let's say we have a class added to it called button primary. Now what we can do, we can locate that button using its class. Now the differentiation between an ID and the class would be, for ID it starts with a pound sign, for classes it starts with a dot. So once you do dot and then the class name, it's going to locate the element or the elements that matches this particular class. However, be a bit careful when you are locating by class because unlike IDs, the classes are reusable. IDs should be unique in your web page. So when you are using ID to locate something, you're quite sure that there will be only one occurrence of that. However, when you're using classes, there could be possibilities that the same class has been applied on multiple elements, and when you are using that class to locate, the result will be, the output will be multiple elements than just one. So be careful about it. Next one is by XPath. These are all like we call them as CSS selectors. Now there is another way that you can locate is something called XPath. XPath is great when IDs are missing on your element. Okay, so you can always go for XPath when you think that, okay, using a class selector might be too heavy, multiple things might come up, go for XPath kind of implementation for your locators. This is an example of XPath. So what we are doing, use XPath, and then using the XPath, where I'm able to locate the element and I'm able to do a click event on this. So I'm locating an element which is an anchor element. That text says login. I'm locating that particular element and simulating a click event on top of it. Now, what is this use CSS? You understood what is this use XPath, right? Before you use the XPath notation to locate any element, you will be using this utility called use XPath. But what is use CSS? Now, if you want to use more locators on top of it or more assertions, which we'll be learning in a while on top of it, you have to convert it again to use it with CSS, right? If you want to use other CSS selectors on top of this to locate further, to add assertions, make sure that you use this utility on top of this called use CSS, then only you will be allowed to do those. So this helps us to switch back to the CSS mode. Now, while this example, we look for a match or locate that when the text is login, but you want to do a partial text match also, right? You can do something called contains. Now here also we are using the XPath locator only, but instead of just direct matching or the exact matching with the text, here we are saying that if the H2 contains the text called feature, then do a click event simulation on top of that. Now let us use some of this and let's write a test using locators. Let's write a quick login test using the locators we just discussed. We will continue to use this e-commerce playground from Lambda test for all our testing. Under the test folder, right click and create a new test file called login.test.js. I'm sure you have followed the previous session where I have taught you how to start writing your first test and what is describe, what is it, what is browser object, all these things. We are going to use some of them. In case you have missed that, you can always follow it up. The link to the video is in the description of this video as well. So let's get started by describing our test. As we are doing a login test, we'll call it as e-commerce playground login test. Then it takes a callback function. In this, we define the test cases, individual test cases using it. So here we are testing should login successfully. That's our test case. And then we will have one more callback function. But right now, this callback function also gets a browser object. We have learned and discussed all these things, isn't it, before? Now, using this browser object, first I can locate to the website that I'm planning to test or run my test on, right? For that purpose, we'll do browser.url. Here, let's pass the page URL. We are ready to test. And now I'm going to use some of these locators that we have learned. Why not this email address and password itself? Let me right click again, go to inspect. Here I see there is an ID for this email address called input-email. For password, we have input-password. And if I have to do anything with the login, in case I do, this doesn't have any ID, but it has class, right? We will try to set some test values into email address and the password using the locators. So let's use the method called setValue for setting a value, and here I have to pass the locator. So first my intention is to set the value for the email address field. So I will take its ID, which is input-email, and it will be prefixed by the pound sign because we're dealing with ID. It is get by ID. And then the value that I'm interested in to put here is testuser@example.com. Similarly, let's set value for the password. So in this case, we have located the password element using the ID again. That's why this pound sign, and then the ID value, which is input-password, and we are setting the value saying password 123. After the, here no semicolon. After the setting of value, I want to simulate the click on the login button. Now I have to get the login button. I have to locate the login button. What we have seen, the login button didn't have any ID. It had a class called button primary. Now this button primary class can be in multiple places. On multiple button it could be applied. So if I want to locate using button primary, I might get multiple elements back, and one of them will be that login button. Now it will be hard for me to again process that and find out which one is the login button, right? So instead of that, I can do one more thing. I have taught you by name, right? Now look into it once more. For this input one, there is something called value also, right? It doesn't have any name. It has class, but it has value. Now I can do by value. Since value is this login, right? This login button's value is this login. This login only appearing over here. So let's go to VS Code. On top of this, I can now simulate a click event on which one? On the button whose value is login, correct? After that, let's give it a pause for say 1 second for this thing to process, and then let's end this one. So this is my simple test that I have written. I'm going to run this in a while, but I hope that you understood how I have used these three locators. This is the highlight of this particular session. I have used the locator to locate the email address field, password field, and the button, and simulated their actions on top of that. Now, can we go ahead and run it? Yes, we can. The login-test.js is inside the test folder. Like that's right. That's how we have kept it. So we can utilize the npx nightwatch command. Again, this is what we have seen in the setup video before. In case you missed it, please check it out. So npx nightwatch and then path to this login.test.js file, which is under the test folder. Let's run it. It's running, starting the Chrome driver. So it's running locally. And what we have seen over here that the run is successful. Okay, let me now run it again and show the browser coming up for you so that you can see that the email and the password is getting filled up and the login action actually happens. Here you go. The browser is up, is going to the playground, filled up, and the login action happened. The test is over, right? So we are able to locate the element and we're able to run the tests. Again, you can go ahead and open up the run report. This also how to see, how to look into it, what is there inside. We have covered in the previous videos, so we are not covering it again. So the test with locators is done. But how do you know that login actually successful or not? Correct? And you're also seeing over here, it says no assertions run. This is where assertions come into picture. So what are assertions? Assertions are how we verify our test results. They are the actual truth tellers for our automation, So Nightwatch supports both built-in assertions and also the expect style assertions. Let's see both of them in action. By the way, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to get notification on the upcoming sessions. In the next session, we are also going to learn how to deal with the async await along with test. That's something I think in the modern JavaScript world is mandatory to know, mandatory to learn to tackle important use cases in your testing. Don't miss that out. All right, let us now look into some of the built-in assertions. What if you have to check if a page title contains certain text or not? If it contains certain text that you are looking for, then your test pass, otherwise test fail. This is what the assertion meaning, right? To prove that what you are looking for is exactly happening or it is not happening, right? So how are you going to assert on if a page title contains certain text or not? We can write it in this way: browser.assert title contains. This is the method, and this is what we are passing as a text. If the title contains this text, then we are asserting as true or the pass. Similarly, can we ensure if an element is visible? Certainly we can. We can write an assertion using visible. And do you see over here that we are actually combining the locators and the assertions together? We are saying that, hey, locate an element whose ID is input-email and assert if in case this particular element is visible, true or false. Right? So we can actually look for if that element is visible, then do something else basically. Then we can extend this title contains to assert on if a particular element contains a text. So in that case, we can say contains text. And this is again, we are using the CSS locators or the CSS selector locators, where we're saying if there is an element which is having a class called page-title, because we have started with the dot notation, and underneath if there is a h2 as a child of that element, then check whether that element, that h2, has a text called returning customer. You see the power of it. You're locating and then you're asserting. We can even validate, right, that if a input element got a certain kind of value or not. Here we are checking if the input email element is having testuser@example.com as a value or not. So test contains visible content text value all help you in assertions. These assertions instantly tell you if your UI matches your expectations or not. Now, this is what we have written in the built-in style in NightwatchJS, right? There is one more style that you can use, is called using the expect style assertion. So some of these things, if I rewrite or I give an example of expect style, it will be like this. So here we are saying browser expect element whose ID is input-element to be visible. This is exactly similar to this. So here it is like more programmatic way, I would say. If you read this line, you are calling a function called visible, passing the ID of it and checking whether it is visible or not. That's how you are applying assertion. This one is more like a natural English language way. Browser expect an element with this ID to be visible. This also supported. Similarly, we have done the content, right? This content text. If I have to write the content text in the expect way, I can write browser expect the element h2 text to contain returning customer. Browser expect the element input password to have an attribute called type which equals to password. So this is more like your natural language way, the way that we speak in English, that way of writing. And the default way is more about the programmatic way. You can go for either of these, especially if you are migrating your test cases, which is already written in the expect style to Nightwatch.js from another library or framework. You can keep retaining your test cases as it is. No need to change any syntaxes because this is allowed in Nightwatch.js. There is one more thing that we want to learn now. It's called negative assertion. Negative assertions are equally important. They ensure unwanted elements don't appear. So we have seen like to be visible with expect. What if we want to do not to be visible, right? So we will write the same cases in a way like browser expect element alert success to not to be present. Okay, this works. If I go to nightwatch.js documentation, you can find some of these things here as well. See here, browser expect element, then the ID using which you are going to locate this element, text to not equal nightwatch, right? So this particular assertion is working in a way that if that element text is not the nightwatch, then it's true. So to write a lot of negative test cases, your negative assertions would be helpful. In that case, you can use this not directly. You can also use this not in the programmatic way, like how we are doing visible text contains, etc. You can use dot not along with your dot visible as well. So starting Nightwatch version 1.3, all assertions, including the custom defined assertions, have a dot not counterpart. Okay. So here is an example. Browser.element.find assert not element present. So it will assert if this particular element is not present. So let us now write one test where we can combine locators and the assertions together and understand that. So this is a perfect blend of locators and the assertions. What is this test? This is again login and verifying test. I'm describing it in that way, and there is a test case should show login attempt warning. If we are trying to log in too many times, it should show a warning. Our test URL is this particular page. These 3 lines I don't have to tell you because we did it just a while back with our previous test. We are setting the value of email with this particular value, password with this particular password, and then simulating a click. Then we are waiting for an element to be visible, and that element can be located using this locator. Now look into this locator. What is this locator? We are saying that there will be a div which has a class called alert, alert danger, alert dismissible. So series of classes are there on a div. Wait for that particular element to appear visible. Once that element visible, now we are applying our assertion. Our assertion is that once that element is visible, is that element contain, see text contain, the same element contains this particular test or not. Warning, your account has been exceeded allowed number of login attempts. Okay. And we are not stopping there. We are also expecting that element, this particular breadcrumb element, to have this particular text called login. So this is our test. We have combined now a bunch of locators that we have learned before along with the assertions over here with dot assert and also with dot expect. So it's a correct blend of whatever we have learned so far, right? Let's run this. The test case file name is login-verify.test.js, which is under test folder. I'm running this. Again, my browser come up. It will fill, yes, login. And it passed 3 assertions. That's what it's saying. So all the 3 assertions that we have in that test, all the 3 assertions are done. What are those? Expect this particular div to be visible. That's the first assertion. Then we are checking whether it contains a certain kind of text or not. It is done. Then third, the breadcrumb to have the login as one of the text. All 3 are satisfied. Our test has passed. So here your test is no longer just clicking the buttons. It is also verifying its outcomes. That's where assertions are pretty strong and handy. Next, let's learn about page objects. So far we have seen a couple of examples, and in both the examples we have used locators directly inside our test. But imagine in a real project, complex environment with hundreds of test files, updating a single selector everywhere, that will be a real chaos, right? That's the exact reason Nightwatch provides something called a page objects. You can consider it as like a design pattern that separates your locators and the actions from the actual test logic. If you browse to any NightwatchJS repository, including ours, you will find a folder called Nightwatch. Expand that. There will be a folder called page-objects. This is given to you by Nightwatch itself with some example files already. You will be keeping your page objects inside this folder. Let's create a file under page objects called loginpage.js. So here you defined a few things. One, on which URL this test has to be performed, because we'll be talking about locators, right? So once we talk about the locators, we have to talk about the elements. Then if we talk about the elements, that element should be in some page, some web page that you want to bring it in your testing. So you have to define that using something called URL. So you need the definition of URL inside this, you need the definition of elements, and you would also need something called commands. So this is what we will create as a custom implementation of our page objects over here, and we'll be utilizing this page object in one of our tests. That's the goal. Now to do that, let's write module.exports, because whatever we define, it has to be accessed elsewhere, so we have to export it. Let's export as an object. So first thing that we are going to define is the URL. In our case, the URL looks like this, same our e-commerce playground URL. And then we are going to define certain elements, because we are going to define a custom command. Let's say login. If I provide an email and password, what it is going to do, it is going to set the value for the email address field, set the value for the password field, and simulate a click on the login button. Now, if I want these 3 things to happen again and again in different places on my test cases, I don't want to write that locators.setValue, click every time. That's the reason in programming we use something called function, so that you write once and you can utilize it in multiple different places. Same thing in the context of a page object is called a commands. So you have to define a command. The commands will be defined in this way. Say commands : you can define multiple commands. Let's define one command that we need is something called a login. And the login can take an email and a password. Okay. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to return this dot set value. Whatever the email has been passed, I have to set this as a value to my email input element. Now, where is this email input element can come from? This is where we have to define something called an elements. So we'll define something called an elements. This is again an object. Here you can define the definition of each of this, like email input is pound input email, right? That is the ID of that email input through which we can access it. Similarly, for password, we can have input-password and can call it as password input. This name can be any name of your choice. Okay. For login button, we can have a login button like this. Similarly, we can have things like say header title, whatever it is, right? Now we have defined these things. Only reason because we want to use this inside this command. So now I'll be doing, if I have to set this email address value to this particular email input, I'll be doing like this, taking this email input. I have to use this at, don't forget, okay? At, then this variable name, this key name, email input, and then you pass the actual value of it. Now see the fun of it. Anywhere, now I have to perform a login. Login means setting up the value of email field, setting up the value of password field, and click. I'll be just calling this login function using this email and password. It's going to set this up. on the email input field. Similarly, I have to do for password. As simple as that, password input, which is nothing but this guy, input hyphen password. I'm setting the password. And finally, I have to do a click. That's it. I have done the click. So don't miss this at again. That is how you refer elements inside the page object. We are referring this, but we have now written a command that we can use into our test. So hope you understood how to create the page object. The whole idea of the page object is reusability. This is where you are using all your locators in one place. Using the locators, you are exposing certain commands or function that you can use into your test. Let's use that. So I have now created a test called login page test. It should log in successfully and verify the account page. See this line. This is what you should be most interested in. This login page is nothing but this login page.js, and I have exported things from here. You can see I have exported this login command also. You can see. Now this login page instance, we can get it by doing browser.page.login page. Why page? Because this is a page object. It is available on the browser.page that is given by Nightwatch.js. So you are getting the instance of this login page saying that browser.page.login page, which return your login page. Now on the login page, you are navigating using this login command that you have exposed from here. The login command takes an email and a password that exactly you are passing as your test case email and password, and then you are doing the assert. So here in this file, you are not seeing a single locators. Did you see that? Because the locators are now encapsulated, completely taken out inside this page object. So you are passing your values, and based on the value, you are just writing your assertion. So anybody reading this one is almost like a natural language. On login page, on login, using these values, expect the element of your header text to equal my account. This is I have shown you just to ensure that you understand that this login is encapsulating all the locators over here. But even if you want to access a locator from your page object, you don't have to really repeat it inside your test. See how I am accessing this header title. This header title is never ever declared in your test. This header title is declared inside your login page over here, and I can access that still inside my test like this. So this is the good part of it, because this header title you might be using in some other test also. You don't have to write it everywhere. Okay. So I hope this page object is clear to you. This approach makes your test cleaner, modular, and easy to maintain. It is like you update your selector in one place, update your selector once, and it reflects everywhere. Tomorrow, if you change your header title from H3 to H1 or H2 to H3 or something else, you don't have to go to all the test file and change it. You change just in one place. That's the beauty of it. Now that you have mastered the assertions and the locators in this session, the upcoming session, we are going to talk about asynchronous test, how to handle async test with NightwatchJS, and then we'll be talking about multiple browser tests, and finally we'll be talking about debugging. Stay tuned to that. Don't forget to subscribe. Again, thank you for listening to me. This entire playlist brought to you by Lambda Test. If you want to learn more about Lambda Test, follow us on lambdatest.com/blog, or you can join our community on community.lambdatest.com. If certification is in your mind, you can achieve Lambda Test certification and recognized on your resume. Please go to www.lambdatest.com/certifications. Get educated, get recognized. Thank you guys. We'll be coming back again with the next session very soon.